The House chamber buzzed with restless energy, a chaotic mix of public debate and media spectacle. But amid the noise, one sentence cut through like a blade. Scarlett Johansson stood with theatrical confidence, her voice booming across the floor, used to commanding attention on screen and stage. Charlie Kirk represented division, not sacrifice, she declared, eyes scanning the crowd with the certainty of someone used to applause. And for a moment, she got it. From her usual circle of celebrity allies, their claps echoing through the chamber like a stamp of approval. Cameras flashed, pundits readied their tweets, but one man didn't flinch. The actor Jonathan Roumie sat stiff-backed in his chair, the folded American flag that had draped Charlie Kirk's coffin resting in his lap. His grip on it was tight, not just out of respect, but to keep from standing up and screaming. The room may have been filled with powerful voices, performative activism, but for Jonathan Roumie, this wasn't theater. This was a fight for truth. He didn't speak immediately. He let the silence thicken, let the weight of the moment settle. And when he finally stood, the chamber quieted, not out of respect, but from curiosity. Because when Jonathan Roumie rose, something was broken. Miss Johansson, he began, his voice calm but cutting. I knew Charlie Kirk. I knew the man who took in veterans with no homes, who organized fundraisers for Gold Star families, who volunteered in neighborhoods many public figures have never set foot in. And I also know this. You just told the ugliest lie of your career. Gasps followed. Scarlett's expression tightened. You don't get to hijack patriotism because you wave a flag around. Jonathan Roumie raised the triangle folded flag high. This flag, he snapped, didn't come from a store. It came from his casket. The room fell completely silent. Even the press gallery froze. Jonathan Roumie wasn't just challenging Scarlett. He was indicting a system that used grief as a headline and sacrifice as a slogan. This was about more than Charlie now. It was about every American who had been smeared, dismissed, and disrespected for not kneeling to the approved narrative. And Jonathan Roumie had just declared open war. Jonathan Roumie's words didn't just echo in the chamber. They ricocheted. The soundbite was already looping on cable news before he even sat down. Scarlett Johansson stood frozen for a beat too long, caught between her usual fury and an unfamiliar unease. She finally broke the silence. With all due respect, Mr. Roumie, Scarlett snapped, her voice rising like an old sermon laced with contempt. You do not speak for the dead. Jonathan Roumie took a single step forward. No, he replied coldly, but I'm not the one rewriting their story. The chamber erupted into murmurs, but Jonathan Roumie didn't care. He didn't even blink. He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his coat pocket, a handwritten letter Charlie Kirk had sent him just months before his death. It was crinkled, the ink smudged from being read too many times. And at the top, in bold handwriting, were 5 chilling words. If they erase me, speak. Jonathan Roumie lifted the letter. This was his last message to me. Not to be buried, not to be beautified, but to be remembered. And if that offends you, Mr. Johansson, maybe you should ask yourself why. The room was deathly still, the kind of still that made staffers stop typing and reporters forget their questions. Even a few of Scarlett's allies shifted awkwardly in their seats. Scarlett stepped toward him, now visibly rattled. You think this letter justifies your grandstanding? You're little stunts. Charlie Kirk was a provocateur, not a patriot. Jonathan Roumie didn't budge. Then say his name, he fired back. Say it on the record. Say the name of the man you just smeared while holding such public influence. Say it or sit down. Scarlett didn't answer. Jonathan Roumie folded the letter back into his coat pocket like a dagger he could wield again if needed. He didn't need to shout. His tone had the quiet finality of truth, and that was more devastating than any headline. Because what echoed after that moment wasn't Scarlett's anger. It was her silence. Jonathan Roumie stood motionless and Scarlett Johansson slowly returned to her seat. The oxygen in the room had shifted. Every reporter, every staffer, every silent witness in the gallery could feel it. The tension of someone who'd been caught playing politics with a coffin. Scarlett tried to recover. She flipped through her notes with shaking hands and spoke into the mic, her voice sharp and defensive. Mr. Roumie is exploiting grief for clicks. Charlie Kirk's legacy is not official record. He was not a soldier. He did not serve. document. He held it up. This is a public statement drafted by an influential activist group you are affiliated with, meant to honor civilians killed in political violence, including Charlie. It was presented for public endorsement and debate. You and your colleagues could have supported its original wording, but you publicly opposed it. He continued, you publicly advocated against including Charlie Kirk's name, effectively denying him recognition. Not because of procedure, because of politics. Scarlett's face flushed, but she couldn't interrupt. Jonathan Roumie had the floor now, and he wasn't letting go. You honored activists who set cities on fire. You championed causes that erased entire communities. But when a conservative voice was silenced, you looked the other way. Jonathan Roumie paused, letting that sink in. His fingers gripped the edge of the podium, not from nerves, but from sheer force of restraint. You didn't just deny Charlie Kirk, he said. You denied every young American who believed their voice mattered. You spoke against the truth, and now the truth is speaking back. From the back of the room, someone stood and clapped once, then another, then another. It wasn't an applause for show. It was raw, angry, and it was growing. Jonathan Roumie stepped away from the mic, not because he was done, but because he knew he didn't have to say another word. The facts were loud enough. Scarlett Johansson tried to stand again, but the damage was done. Her eyes darted toward the cameras. She offered a half smile, but it cracked beneath the weight of silence. She reached for the mic and said, let's be clear, this isn't about Charlie Kirk. This is about extremism. We mustn't glorify divisive figures. Jonathan Roumie didn't even blink. He turned, walked back toward the table, and picked up the folded American flag once more, Charlie's flag. He held it in both hands like a sacred artifact. Then in a voice that cut through the tension like a blade, he said, you fly the flag when it's convenient. I carry it when it's heavy. The room froze. Jonathan Roumie's tone was calm, but it carried the weight of every funeral, every silenced voice, every folded flag handed to a weeping mother. While the cameras were rolling, he didn't need to shout. Truth doesn't yell. It stings in silence. You call Charlie divisive, he said, walking back towards Scarlett. But he never looted a city. He never burned a courthouse. He challenged power with words, and that frightened him. Scarlett tried to interject, but Jonathan Roumie raised the flag higher. You say he was a threat. I say he was a mirror, and you didn't like what you saw. He turned to the gallery. Charlie Kirk was more than a conservative voice. He was a son, a brother, a believer in this country, and you tried to erase him, not because he was dangerous, but because he made people listen. The weight of his words hung heavy. The silence wasn't empty, it was echoing. Not one member of the press looked down at their phones. Not one staffer whispered to their neighbor. It was the kind of stillness that follows a truth no one wants to admit out loud. Jonathan Roumie folded the flag gently and placed it on the podium right next to the document Scarlett had publicly opposed. That flag doesn't need your permission, he said. It flew long before you sat in that chair, and it'll fly long after you're gone. The moment was seismic, not political, personal, and Scarlett Johansson, once defiant, now looked like someone who had underestimated the strength of a man carrying the weight of a nation's silence. Scarlett straightened herself and reached for a binder filled with talking points, but her fingers trembled slightly. The room had shifted, not just in tone, but in power. The audience wasn't watching Scarlett anymore. Every eye, every lens, every live stream was fixed on Jonathan Roumie and the folded flag in front of him. You can cling to your platform, Jonathan Roumie continued, his voice firm but unshaken. But don't you dare pretend you care about the people who built this country or the ones who died trying to protect what it stands for. He stepped forward, tapping the document Scarlett had recently opposed. It was a resolution meant to honor fallen conservative voices, including Charlie Kirk, and you publicly opposed it. You spoke against honoring him, Jonathan Roumie said, his words slicing clean. Not because he was dangerous, but because he told sure no one forgets what you did. You tried to bury him twice, once in the ground and once with your public words. But here's the thing, Ms. Johansson. He raised his hand toward the press gallery. Every flag you tried to fold will unfold louder. Every voice you silenced will echo stronger. Every lie you told will meet it with truth, even if it takes us to this floor again and again. The veterans in the back row stood quietly, arms crossed. One of them, a man who had known Charlie personally, had tears in his eyes. No one applauded. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was heavier than applause, it was reverence. Scarlett turned her face slightly to avoid the cameras, but it was too late. The freeze frame of her looking away from the flaw and from Jonathan Roumie had already been captured, and that image would be on every screen by sunset. Jonathan Roumie didn't move from the podium. The flag stayed open in his hands, draped like a shield. Scarlett tried to shuffle her notes again, but no amount of paper could buffer her from the truth sitting just feet away. I know what you're thinking, Jonathan Roumie said, voice now quieter, not retreating, but drawing again. You think this is about Charlie because he was conservative. You think his beliefs justify your silence. But this flag isn't red or blue. It's American, and he carried it longer than you ever dared to. Scarlett opened her mouth. He wasn't a soldier, but he was in the fight. Jonathan Roumie shot back instantly. He fought for speech, for comedy, for unborn life. He fought for communities you forgot the moment cameras stopped rolling. And unlike you, he didn't run to the media to cry victim when someone disagreed. A single clap echoed from the back. An older woman, church dress, and pearls. She stood, then another. Within seconds, half the gallery had risen, silent, solemn. Not for politics, for principle. Jonathan Roumie's gaze got back to Scarlett. He didn't need your permission to matter, and he sure didn't need your approval to be honored. But what disgusts me, Ms. Johansson, is that you lied. A flicker of panic crossed Scarlett's face. You lied to the public. You said you'd honor all lives lost in the spirit of unity. But when it came time, you crossed out his name. You called him a threat, a stain, a disgrace. Jonathan Roumie held up the printout, an internal document from an organization Scarlett championed. The highlighter marks the red line edit where Charlie's name had been scratched from a proposed public statement. The room gasped again. You carried that lie all the way to your public platform, Jonathan Roumie said. And now you want us to pretend you care about flags, about process, about truth. He shook his head. No, Scarlett, he carried the flag. You carried the lie. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was electric, and Scarlett could feel it, her credibility cracking under the weight of Jonathan Roumie's words. The press cameras were locked in, capturing a new narrative, one she couldn't control. Scarlett stepped back from the mic, visibly rattled. Her usual confidence, the kind that had carried her through decades in the public eye, was now replaced with a shaky resolve. She shuffled her notes again, this time not out of preparation, but desperation. Jonathan Roumie had done something rare in that chamber. He had spoken without a filter, without fear, and the entire room felt the shift. Jonathan Roumie didn't let up. You see, when someone dies for a cause, we're supposed to remember why. Not cherry-pick their flaws, not smear their name to make ourselves feel safe. You didn't just omit Charlie from the record. You tried to erase what he stood for. Gasps rippled through the audience as Jonathan Roumie raised another document. This time, a series of emails between staffers on Scarlett's public relations team. Screenshots projected on the chamber wall behind him in bold font. One line was underlined. We can't risk uplifting a figure like Kirk. He'll be a martyr. The silence exploded into murmur. Scarlett's voice. This is a breach of decorum. No, Jonathan, he snapped. What you did was a breach of decency. He took one step closer, eyes blazing. Charlie never asked for your approval. He didn't wait for Hollywood to validate. He lived with conviction, and now he's gone. And you think you can sweep it under the rug and move on? Not on my watch. Scarlett tried again to counter. His rhetoric was dangerous. So is yours, Jonathan Roumie fired back. But we don't erase you. That hit hard. Even some of Scarlett's allies flinched. Jonathan Roumie's voice lowered, but the force behind it didn't waver. You don't get to rewrite his legacy because you didn't tone. You don't get to delete his story from the American record just because it doesn't serve your agenda. He turned to the press. And if the media refuses to cover this, if they keep spinning it like he was just another name, then we will. The mothers, the fathers, the kids who tuned into Charlie because no one would speak their fears out loud. They'll carry the truth. He turned back to Scarlett. You tried to silence him in death, but I promise you the silence go louder with every flag, every Bible, every person he moved. Jonathan Roumie didn't leave the podium. Not yet. Not while the weight of Scarlett's silence still filled the chamber like smoke after. He reached into his folder again and the paper looked worn, creased from being opened and closed, as if it had traveled through grief itself. He held it up. This was a letter Charlie wrote it to a student who messaged him after being bullied for attending one of his events. She said he never posted. He didn't boast about it, but I will. He unfolded it slowly, the microphones amplifying the soft of the paper, began to read. I don't care if they laugh at you. I don't care if they call you, because truth has never been. Courage has never been easy. But if you keep standing, they'll have no choice but to listen. And eventually they'll realize you were right, because history always comes back for the brave. Jonathan Roumie looked up, his voice thick but steady. You want to talk about dangerous rhetoric, Scarlett? That's what Charlie considered dangerous. Truth spoken. A murmur of rippled through the gallery. A mother clutched her teenager's hand. A young man in the back nodded. Scarlett opened her mouth, but for once she had nothing. No witty dismissal, no deflection, just the sting of being publicly. Jonathan Roumie stepped forward. You didn't just lie about him. You calculated. You erased his impact because it terrified you. And now you're hiding behind your seat like that gives you moral ground. He held up the flag again, one that Charlie's family had sent him after it folded sharp, tucked into the triangle every veteran's family too well. This flag, he said, means something to people outside this building. People who don't get chauffeured to gated debates. People who don't use words like problematic to erase the chamber when still. You can't bury him, Scarlett, and you sure as hell can't bury what. The silence that hung in the no longer awkward. It was surgical. Jonathan Roumie had carved right through the image Scarlett Johansson constructed, not just of herself, but of Charlie Kirk. And now that carefully spun narrative was bleeding under the lights of the Capitol. Scarlett shifted in her seat, her eyes darting toward her aides, as if one of them might toss her a lifeline. But there was no memo, no pre-written quote, no cable that could undo what had just happened. Jonathan Roumie didn't stop. Let me be clear, he said, unwavering. You're not just guilty of lying about Charlie. You're guilty of trying to redefine American itself. He stepped away from the podium and walked toward. No one told him to sit. No one dared. You called him a rat. You said he poisoned young minds. You accused him of sowing. But let me ask, Scarlett. He turned toward the actress, now visibly behind her. Is it division when someone calls out corruption? Is it poisoning minds to teach young people they're allowed to think for themselves? Is it radical to love this country out loud? A single clap rang out from the back, then another. It grew slowly like a spark turning in flame, and it wasn't performative. It was real. Scarlett leaned toward her mic, voice brittle. You are exploiting a man's death. Jonathan Roumie snapped around, cutting her off with a glare that could have shattered glass. No, you exploited his death by twisting it to justify your agenda. He held up his phone, screen glowing. This is the last photo I ever read from Charlie. He was standing outside a veteran shelter holding boxes of supplies. No press, no cameras, no political talking, just service. Jonathan Roumie turned it to face the camera. Now for the first time that day, the image of Charlie Kirk flashed across, not the caricature the media do, but the man who moved mountains behind this and the caption he sent with it. Still fighting the good fight. Some things are bigger than British time. Jonathan Roumie looked back at the Scarlett. You wouldn't know about that, would you? The room didn't explode. It cracked. The veneer control that Scarlett had wrapped herself in shattered under the weight of Jonathan Roumie stepped down from the podium, slow and deliberate, not retreating but releasing the moment like a final note in a national. The flag he held trembled slightly in his grasp, not from fear, but from something, the weight of memory, of duty, of love. Scarlett Johansson didn't say another word, not because she lacked the will, because she knew. She had just lost the, not in a political sense, but morally, spiritually. Even her colleagues on the left avoided her eyes now, the way one avoids looking at someone who just got caught stealing from the offering. Jonathan Roumie stood at the center of the chamber, flag folded in the shape of a triangle, the kind they hand to mothers at burial. But this wasn't Charlie. It was his resurrection. Let me tell you what this flag, Jonathan Roumie said softly, his voice carrying the silence. It doesn't belong to the loudest voice. It doesn't wave on the powerful, the politically favored. It covers the casket of the forgotten soldier. It flies over the head of the child, praying for a better life. It's stitched by sacrifice. And Charlie Kirk understood that better than most of you sitting here. He turned to the cameras. America, don't let them rewrite don't let them erase the blood. The room was frozen. Reporters didn't reach for questions. Lawmakers didn't shift in their chairs. And Scarlett didn't try to spin. Jonathan Roumie placed the flag on the table in front of, not as a gift, but as a charge. You lied about, he whispered, just loud enough for the microphone to catch. But this flag doesn't lie. And one day when you're gone, it will still be here telling them. With that, he walked out. No security, no handler, just silence and thunder. And across the nation, millions, some with tears, others with clenched fists, but all with realization. Charlie Kirk may have died, but his country hadn't. In a chamber built for speeches, one truth silenced. Jonathan Roumie didn't just defend Charlie, he resurrected the meaning of sacrifice. While Scarlett spun narratives, Jonathan Roumie, a flag soaked in grit, in the blood of men like Charlie Kirk. And when the noise dies down, the lies, that flag's not for the politician, for the patriot.